Good morning, Dilliman Abdulkder. Thank you for consenting to this interview uh, so that our listeners and or audience understand who and what you are in the organization. Why don't you tell us about your background and specifically about American Friends for Kurdistan, its mission, its range of activities with Congress, and the White House providing information regarding Kurdish issues and policies.
Definitely, and thank you, Jerry, for having me on again. Great to speak to you on these really critical issues as they happen in the Middle East. Again, my name is Dilliman Abdulkder, co-founder and spokesperson for American Friends of Kurdistan, which is the only independent advocacy and education organization based in DC to enhance U.S. Kurdish relations. And what that means is that AFK, American Friends of Kurdistan, focuses on all four regions of Kurdistan, the Kurds in Iraq, Iran, Syria, and Turkey, which number at an estimated 45 million plus. We are an independent organization, meaning that we're not affiliated with any Kurdish governments, political parties, or individuals. And we are a bipartisan organization. We work with both sides of the Congress in order to enhance and develop that relation between the Kurds and Americans, because we see this relationship as a U.S. interest, but also a human rights interest as well.
Monday, March 8th, 2021 was International Women's Day for Syrian Kurdish women. It marked an opportunity to celebrate their emancipation, courage, and leadership in the battle for human rights and freedom in their homeland, besieged by the Islamic State, Erdogan's Turkey, and Assad's Syria. What is their status in the Kurdish community? And why is it an important example for other subjugated women in the Middle East?
The Kurdish women have proven that even in the Middle East, women can be free, women are able to defend themselves, and women can be part of the society and part of the political life and make key decisions in developing this region for the future. And the Women's Protection Unit, which is the YPJ, have been incredible examples ever since, I mean, even long before, but, they started being recognized by, the mainstream media about 2014 with the, as the ISIS and Daesh attacked the small town of Kobani. And the YPJ, the Women's Protection Unit, were forced to protect themselves because they were surrounded by ISIS on one side, and on the opposite side was a Turkish border who decided not to help at all until the United States decided to act and support the Kurds there with airstrikes. So I think, there is a philosophy behind the Women's Protection Unit. And, the idea is women, life, freedom. In Kurdish is Jin, Jian, Azadi. And what that means is that without women, there's no freedom. Without women, there's no life. And, you cannot be free in a society, and a society cannot be successful without the emancipation of women. And, we've seen this success develop over the years, over the past 4, 5, 6 years. Women today are co-chairs in the political society of Northeast Syria, and they play key roles in top political roles in the YPJ, in the Syrian Democratic Forces. And there's no limit to what they can do, and the Kurds have proven that.
There's a new book by Gail Samach Lemon, Daughters of Kobani, and it profiles several Syrian Kurdish women of the YPJ that you discussed who were part of the Syrian Democratic Force. They became fighters and ultimately battle-tested commanders in major campaigns backed by U.S. air and special forces that liberated northeastern Syria from the Islamic State. Who are these women? What motivated their quest for emancipation? And what were their leadership roles during the critical battles to liberate Syrian Kurdistan from the Islamic State?
Again, these women are key players in what is happening in the Syrian civil war and what is happening, especially in Northeast Syria. They are not only setting an example for Northeast Syria, but for the entire Middle East. Again, they play key critical roles in top positions. These are not just, oh, let's include the women, let them vote. No, we're beyond this. And they have proven to be critical to the future of the Middle East, I would argue. They are presidents. They are legislators in Northeast Syria. They are, they run towns, and they are commanders, and they're special forces. They play leadership roles. This is very unique in this part of the world. It's not seen, and they've proven the Islamic State wrong. We know that. The biggest threat for the Islamic State extremists were that, hey, it's worse to get killed by a man, but it's even worse to get killed by a woman. And the Kurdish women realized this. So they took this as an advantage. They liberated their town of Kobani in 2014. And I think this book by Gail Lemon is it's well timed. It highlights the achievements of the Kurdish woman in Northeast Syria. And what's great about it is, I would argue, is that it allows everybody to learn about their successes. Not a lot of people, unfortunately, not a lot of people know about what's going on in Northeast Syria to this day, even though the civil war has been ongoing since 2011. But this highlights the achievements of what can be possible if women play leadership.
What is the status of these Syrian Kurdish women now in the wake of the Turkish and jihadist allies' incursion into Northeast Syria?
They're constantly a threat. Why? Because this not only threatens the jihadist agenda, but it also threatens the Erdogan regime's agenda. It sets an example for what the Kurds in Turkey can do, for example. As you know, there's 20+ million Kurds inside Turkey. And they too have this ideology. The majority of the Kurds there have the ideology of the women in Northeast Syria do. They go by the philosophy of women, life, freedom. And this, of course, threatens this extremist, radical Islamist ideology. And the mission of these radical groups, including the Turkish regime, is to, if they had their way, is to eliminate these Kurdish women.
The U.S. effectively withdrew most of its special forces in Syria, retaining limited control of strategic posts. What is the continuing mission, operations, and activities of the Syrian Democratic Force?
The U.S. mission has reshifted back to its original goals and mission, which was to train, equip, and advise the Syrian Democratic Forces in Northeast Syria. Previous from the previous administration, with President Trump saying that we're there to protect oil. We're beyond that now, and that is a good thing. President Biden's obviously the policy of the Biden administration is to do what's different from the previous administration, but that is a good thing for the Kurds. Back in 2019, November 2019, before the withdrawal, as you know, there were 2,000 U.S. troops. That number has since then gradually declined. Today, there are an estimated, the latest numbers, I believe, from the Department of Defense is about 900 U.S. troops based in Northeast Syria. And that mission is back to train, equip, and advise. And the Kurds, I will tell you, they are more hopeful in Northeast Syria with the Americans there. They're not asking for, hundreds of thousands of American boots. We know that's not realistic, and that's not necessary because the Kurds are there. They have their own forces as well, in addition to the 900 U.S. forces there. But I would argue is to reset this number back to 2000, previous to the 2019 withdrawal, in order to re-strengthen this relationship between the Kurds and Americans in Syria.
How destabilizing are Turkey's recent actions in Syria and adjacent Iraqi Kurdistan? We note the threats to the Yazidi minority in Sinjar and recent raids on PKK camps in the Kurdish region in Iraq.
Listen, the Turkish regime, and again, I've argued this before, this is not an Erdogan policy, but this is a Turkish government policy. Before Erdogan, it'll be the same thing after Erdogan. They are 100% against all Kurds. They may argue otherwise, just for, just to better their image. But the Kurds know, if you ask any Kurd, the Turkish government is against all Kurds. This is unfortunate. And why do we argue this? It's because the Kurds have a conflict. The Turks have conflicts with the Kurds inside Turkey. The Turks have conflicts with Kurds inside northeast Syria, and they also have multiple, they have constant airstrikes in northern Iraq and the Kurdistan region, and this continues on a daily basis. The recent incursion into what you're mentioning with the PKK and Gara region, that just continues proof that Turkey does not want a peaceful solution with the Kurds. The only solution to this Turkish-Kurdish conflict is for a peaceful solution, and that's through dialogue, not military intervention, because this will create more Kurdish nationalism. This will create more Kurdish grievances against the Turkish government. And if you're constantly igniting military campaigns, we saw what happened in Afrin, we saw what happened in northeast Syria in 2019. The airstrikes continue in northeast Syria to this day, and the continuous military operations in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. We know that this is against all Kurds. And just to give you another example of that, that goes beyond the Turkish argument, oh no, we're only against the PKK. Just the Pope recently visited the Kurdistan region, the autonomous region. It was unofficial, but there were gifts given to the Pope, and one of those gifts was a picture of a stamp depicting the Pope's face with the map of Kurdistan in the back, right, behind him. And the Turkish government, including with the Iranian regime, but mostly the Turkish government, were infuriated with this. Why? Because it depicted a Kurdish map. And they said, oh, the Kurdish dream, and you should give up on this dream of independence and self-determination. This is against our national security. The map depicts areas within Turkey. You're claiming land within Turkey. This is a simple map can ignite a war by Turkey against the Kurds. A simple stamp, excuse me. So I mean, this is the ideology of the Turkish regime and Turkish nationalism and the Erdogan government. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like it'll be solved anytime soon.
How threatening is the presence of Iran proxies, the Hashd al-Shaabi popular mobilization units, to both Sinjar and the Iraqi Kurdish regions, given recent rocket attacks incurring casualties on U.S. bases in both Erbil and at the Al-Assad Air Base?
Hashd al-Shaabi continues to be a threat to the entire region of Iraq. Why? Because it's backed by Iran, and it also undermines Iraqi national security. Iraqi military, Iraqi forces, its security apparatus, the police, and in politics, it's economics. So I think they have infiltrated into every aspect of the Iraqi sovereignty, and this in return also affects the Kurdistan region. You mentioned the airstrikes. The airstrikes were targeted at U.S. service members based in the U.S. base in Erbil. And also, there were, and they've continued to threaten other areas of Iraq. So, I mean, that's close to where U.S. forces are, for example, the Green Zone and the U.S. Embassy. The Hashd al-Sha'bi forces in the recent strikes might not have taken responsibility for the recent strikes, missile strikes, but they have inspired other smaller groups to do the same as it was doing previously. So I mean, they continue to be a threat. Unfortunately, the PMF, the Popular Mobilization Forces, or Hashd al-Sha'bi, is still a legitimate force under the Iraqi constitution. And this was done by the previous Prime Minister, Haider Abadi. And, the Kurdistan region is forced to protect itself, forced to protect its territory. But again, the United States, and I continue to argue this, is to strengthen the autonomous region of the Kurdistan, the Kurdish government in the north, prevent any future incursions. The Biden administration did respond by attacking a proxy of Iran inside in Syria. This was, you can say this was a positive move, of course, but this also shows that the Biden administration doesn't want to take it too far because of the ongoing nuclear discussions, negotiations that are going on behind closed doors. But Hashd al-Sha'bi and the proxies don't care. They themselves are taking it too far. And I think the response from the U.S. government is not proportionate to the threat that these proxies are imposing.
The Erdogan AKP and nationalist MHP parties are trying to eliminate the third largest party in the Ankara parliament, the Kurdish HDP party. Many HDP members of the parliament and elected mayors have been jailed on trumped-up charges. What is the connection between a recent Turkish raid on a PKK base in Iraq and this push to eliminate the HDP?
Well, this has been ongoing, right? Ever since the failed coup, Erdogan has attacked the Kurds, especially its military, the PKK, its military wings, but also, the political aspect of the Kurdish society inside Turkey, the HDP, the People's Democratic Party, which won an estimated 6.5 million votes in the elections in 2015, I believe. And since then, and since the coup, majority of their members of parliament who have been democratically elected by Kurds and even non-Kurds have been thrown in jail on trumped-up charges, as you mentioned, including its co-chair, Salahuddin Demirtas, who has been in jail for 4 years now, and he himself is a human rights lawyer. So the Erdogan government, in connection with the recent PKK strikes, he knew that mission, that military mission campaign failed in Gur because it resulted in, I believe, 13 Turkish soldiers that the PKK was holding. The PKK was holding in their region. So what Erdogan did, in order to save face, he thought it was going to be an easy mission. What Erdogan did is to, crack down further on the Kurds inside Turkey to save face among his supporters. And this is a continuous policy of Erdogan. We know that the Kurdish card is always easy to pull against the Kurds. And, in order for him to continue to stay in power. And sadly, his supporters still continue to support him. They still believe him. They blame the HDP for the recent failures in the military campaign, but we know there's no connection between these two entities. And the banning of the HDP as a political entity in Turkey is no surprise to the Kurds. It's no surprise to HDP themselves, because majority of their members of parliament have been thrown in prison, and also even their municipal electorate leaders in Southeast Turkey who were voted in by Kurds themselves. They've been replaced and removed by the Turkish government, replaced with pro-Erdogan, pro-AKP appointees. So this has been a trend. I think the HDP was prepared for this. And closing down a Kurdish political party just proves to the West, should prove to the EU, and should prove to the United States that, hey, Turkey is not democratic. It doesn't abide by democratic principles. It will do whatever it wants until it is punished, until the EU finally wakes up and says, hey, you will never be an EU member, until NATO says, hey, this is not in accordance to NATO principles, which is democracy as a core principle of the security.
With the start of the Biden administration, are there any prospects for the development of a regional policy recognizing Kurdish and other minority rights? We note the appointment of former Special Envoy Ambassador Brett McGurk as coordinator for Middle East and North Africa. He backed the establishment of the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Force. So what, in your view, is the likelihood of any positive developments for the new administration regarding Kurdish policy?
Well, what's good, the biggest barrier, of course, to any U.S. Kurdish policy is Turkey. Has always been Turkey. Under previous administrations as well, they've always been, the naysayers, even if the United States wants better relations. The positive aspect of this administration is that it wants to do the opposite of the previous administration. What that means is Erdogan can no longer pick up the phone and call President Biden and just spew propaganda in his ears. That is no longer available to him. To this day, since the inauguration, since President Biden's inauguration, Erdogan has not had a call with President Biden himself. This means that the Biden administration is taking a different path than the previous administration, which can play key to a better relations of the Kurdish policy. And you mentioned McGurk within the administration, but McGurk did withdraw from the Trump administration largely because of the withdrawal in 2019 from Syria. He understands Turkey. He understands the ins and outs of Turkey. He understands the ins and outs of the Erdogan regime. And I think he is playing a key role in shaping U.S. policy for the Kurds. And we haven't, it's still early. We haven't seen the full-fledged policy, and we still don't know what the policy is. But we know that the U.S. is not withdrawing. We know that the U.S. relations, the Biden administration's relations with Turkey is not positive. So from that, we can say that the Kurds are hopeful in Northeast Syria compared to the previous administration.
Final question for you is that America's relationships in the Middle East have shifted under the Trump administration with the adoption of what were called the Abraham Accords or Abrahamic Accords, primarily focusing on the Gulf Arab states and to a degree Saudi Arabia, positioning themselves essentially as a possible bulwark against the threat of a nuclear Iran. How does that impact on Kurdish policy?
I believe from my perspective that these new deals that are going on in relations with Israel is a positive for the region. It's a positive for Israel and for the other countries involved. Just because, listen, the Middle East has to evolve and move forward. The real threat is the Iranian regime. And this has been the argument for years now, but it's great that the region is finally realizing this. And if you want peace with Palestine and whatever the argument of two-state solution, whatever the end result is, it doesn't have that issue doesn't have to be the barrier to that. So I think that in itself is a positive, and it allows the Kurds in the future to have open relations with Israel as well. That it's not taboo, because for too long the Kurds have been seen as Israel's project. And, we saw what happened during the referendum in 2017. Erdogan threatened the Kurds there. Qasem Soleimani threatened the Kurds. The Iranian regime as a whole threatened the Kurds and simply said, we will not. Even Nouri Maliki, the former Iraqi prime minister, threatened the Kurds, saying, we're not going to allow a second Israel. So, these steps are positive for the entire region. It allows this region to be more stable, allows, people-to-people interaction, more, cultural interaction between the Jewish people and the rest of the Middle East. And I hope that the Kurds can play part in this, in these open relationships soon. Will it occur soon, or that is a different question, because the Kurds are still considered non-state actors. They have to abide by their central government's relationship and policies. What that means is the Iraqi Kurds might like Israel and the Jewish state, but Iraq as a policy and Baghdad's policy does not have any formal relations with Israel, and that is not going to change anytime soon. And same thing with the other parts. So I think the more countries that join these accords, the better for the region, and hopefully the Kurds can finally come out in the open and have better relations with Israel as well.
Where can our listeners find information on American Friends of Kurdistan online and its activities in Washington, D.C.?
Definitely. So we're available at AmericanFriendsOfKurdistan.org. On Twitter, we're very active, AFK Kurds, at AF Kurds. And you can follow me on Twitter as well. We constantly have meetings with congressional members and their staffers on these issues. And we're even working with like-minded organizations as well. We have a strong coalition of like-minded organizations that have the same values of enhancing U.S. Kurdish relations, in addition to their respective partnerships.
Dilliman Abdulkder, I want to thank you for this engrossing and timely interview, and we hope to hear more about the productive activities of American Friends of Kurdistan. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Jerry. It's a pleasure.
Okay. Okay, that's